Good afternoon to the Leander ISD community, and welcome to Sparkling Portable C at the LISD Administration Building. I'm Matt Mitchell. This is Daniel Cenero, and we're running Master Control here for Let's Talk with Dr. Troxell. And without further ado, we'll head it over to Chief Communications Officer Corey Ryan and Dr. Troxell himself as we get underway. Thanks for joining us.
Well, good evening to our viewers at home watching. Facebook is down across the nation, so we are streaming to YouTube, and thanks to Daniel and Matt, we're also streaming live on Periscope via Twitter. So we're hoping we're getting out there and getting into the public's view, because today we're going to be talking about attendance zones. And Dr. Troxell is actually going to do the interview today, and he's going to ask me some questions as we continue our process for zoning for the 2020-2021 school year with the opening of Danielson Middle School. So I'm going to kick it off to our superintendent.
Well, and I want to, again, welcome everyone this afternoon. Please submit your questions, because we have some prepared questions, but we also want to respond to those in the community who may have inquiries as well. So we want to start off talking about the 2020-21 school year, where we're opening a brand new middle school in the northern part of the district, Danielson Middle School. Tell us a little bit about how that process is happening, what's occurring.
So for the last 3 months, the Board of Trustees has been discussing attendance zones. Myself and our Chief Operations Officer, Jimmy Disler, have been going through the process for zoning and have been presenting scenarios and talking about community engagement with regards to getting feedback from our community for the 2020-21 school year. I've said in our presentations that there are two inevitabilities with this process. One, that Leander ISD is continuing to grow at a rapid rate. We're adding 1,000 new students every year, and our independent demographer is telling us we're going to need to add one additional school every year for the next 10 years to keep up with the growth of 1,000 new students every year. The other reality is Danielson Middle School will open in 2020, because that was voter approved from 2017 by our voters on a bond to address crowding at the middle school level. It's slated to open in 2021 across from Glenn High School. And it's going to serve kids in Leander ISD. So with that, we need to draw attendance zones. Students need to be able to attend Danielson, and we're going to have to tweak the maps as possible. One of the things I have been most proud of as an administrator in Leander ISD, and somebody who has been an administrator in other districts and here regarding attendance zoning, has been our focus on getting community feedback and engaging our community, and I'm excited to be able to share some of that.
Well, why don't we talk about that a little bit before we go back to some other questions that have come in. Let's talk a little bit about how we gathered community feedback, because we had a very specific process that we followed, and I know it's one that's new to this rezoning process, the system we put in place this year. So talk about it a little bit.
So the most important thing that I want to be able to share out about our community feedback with the people is that it has been completely transparent. You can continue to see the results of the 3 different survey opportunities we have if you visit www.leanderisd.org/MSAZ to be able to see all of our different scenarios and the process along the way that we've been on. So we have utilized a new tool called Thought Exchange to gather this feedback. This was something that we worked with our Community Engagement Committee, which has board members and administrators on it, and was a tool that's a different kind of way to survey and collect feedback. So through Thought Exchange, a person goes ahead and accesses the survey tool, which is also mobile friendly, and they go ahead and respond to an open-ended question. After they respond to that open-ended question, they have the opportunity to star or rate additional questions submitted by people within the community. So everybody gets to see what everyone else is stating. At the end of it, they can go ahead and see all of the thoughts as well that have been submitted, and then we publish a report from Thought Exchange to see the actual results of what people say. We do theming to be able to get those big ideas and those big items from it, but also we've published every single thought that's been submitted. It's been open and transparent and has allowed us to collect feedback to best shape it.
So we started with Map A, we presented a Map B just recently. What were some of the big thoughts that came back? Let's talk about Map B just for a moment, because I know we're preparing for the board and Map C now, based on that feedback through Thought Exchange, as well as the dialogue the board had at its last trustees meeting.
That's right. So there are lots of different priorities that people have when you look at drawing an attendance zone. People want you to focus on proximity. They want to be close as possible to their school, or they want to be at the school that's closest to where they live. You can talk about using natural barriers in terms of establishing a zones line. Sometimes there's a focus on relieving overcrowding, which is definitely a purpose as to why we asked voters to approve the construction of a school, is that we have crowding, especially in the northern part of our district at middle schools. Balancing demographics, minimizing change as a fast growth district. Obviously, people in certain neighborhoods have been accustomed to being rezoned, and that is something that we want to try to be cognizant of. So throughout the different variations, and we've went from a pre-scenario survey through Thought Exchange, where we asked people before we even put together the first map scenario for what boundaries could look like in a change. We asked for, hey, what are the things that are most important to you as parents and members of our community? We put together the first scenario, and that was based on 3 guiding principles that rose to the top, and those were proximity to home and geography, feeder patterns that minimize the splitting of small cohorts. So right now, a feeder pattern is the groups of students that go from elementary to middle and high school. We wanted to minimize the amount of small cohorts, so a group of students that transition together from elementary A to middle school A, then to high school A. So for example, if we wanted to make sure that from middle to high school, no less than 30% of an 8th grade class were going to the same high school together. In some cases, we had 15% of a middle school 8th grade class going to a high school class, while 85% of their peers were going to a different high school. So we were trying to minimize those small cohorts in that transition. And we were trying to do some things with proximity to keep kids as close as we could to school, their school.
So Corey, talk to the audience a little bit about the fact, we heard that pure feeder patterns, or an entire middle school going to a high school, was really important, particularly from people who came and spoke at the board meeting, but also through our thought exchange. How were we able to accomplish that, at least in scenario B, and how are we looking at any changes in scenario C?
So I'm going to take a second just to talk about, I don't know if there is an educator or community member who wouldn't want in an ideal scenario to have those perfect feeder patterns where 100% of kids in elementary school A were going with their peers to middle school A and then to high school A, and that was consistent across our district. Unfortunately, that's not a reality in a fast growth district, because the moment that you draw those boundaries that do that, you're going to have to open up another school, and it's going to mess up the work that's done on that.
And I think it's an important point to note. We're opening a school, at least from the demographer's report, every year for at least the next 10 years. So there's going to be that constant change, and you have to look at not just what happens this year when you rezone, but how does it impact children 2 or 3 years down the road.
And you're dealing with data that's very scientific and very purposeful, but it's hard to know within a small margin of error 5, 6, 7 years out. Our demographer historically does an amazing job 1 to 2 years out, does a really good job 3 to 4 years out, but doing 5 years out and beyond is really hard because of all of the different economic indicators, development plans, things that impact home development that anybody in our real estate community or in our title community can definitely speak to, and just knowing that long-term development that impacts the building of schools is really hard to predict.
So go back to that pure feeder pattern idea. Talk about B a little bit. What do we do in B, and then what are some of the changes possibly that people are going to see in C? And I know we're going to get that out to the community as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. So some of the big wins in scenario B was revolving around middle to high school feeder patterns. So what you'll see in scenario B that was presented last Thursday at the Board of Trustees meeting, and again is available for anybody to look at www.leanderisd.org/MSAZ. Some of the great things that scenario B did was create 100% of middle school 8th graders attending the same high school together at 7 of our 9 middle schools, and the 9th being Danielson Middle School. The 2 that would be split are currently split, and the splits would be pretty close to 50-50 in terms of 8th graders going together from middle to high school. So that would be at Stiles Middle School, where that would continue to be approximately 50%, and the exact numbers are on the website, and they're up there right now on the screen for y'all to look at. So 52% of Stiles Middle School students under scenario B would go to Rouse High School, 48% would go together to Vista Ridge High School, and then Leander Middle School would continue to be a split school where 49% of 8th graders would continue on to Glenn High School together, and 51% would continue to Leander High School together. That was a big focus on what we were trying to do with scenario B.
So let me also point out to the members of the audience, as a former middle school teacher, an assistant principal, and a high school principal, that's really significant. We want to have as pure feeder patterns as we possibly can have, because it helps with the academic transition from 8th to 9th grade. There can be a lot of coordination between those 8th and 9th grade teachers as we bring students into the high school. It also helps tremendously for UIL academics, UIL fine arts, and UIL athletics. So it was really important for our community, and we saw that in the first thought exchange, which we actually did prior to even creating a map, that was important. I think we did a very good job overall in scenario B. So before we go talk about some other topics that were important to the community, how does that change in scenario C? To scenario C, are we looking at, again, trying to keep as many of the pure feeder patterns together as possible from middle school to high school in particular?
So a lot of the feedback that we received from our Board of Trustees at our last meeting from last Thursday was regarding that elementary to middle connection,
Right.
while continuing to maintain what we were doing between middle and high school, and maybe finding some tweaks that would help with proximity and relieve some overcrowding for what happened in scenario B. So some of the things that we're looking at in scenario C will be presented at April 4th, at the April 4th meeting of the Board of Trustees, and then following that will be open periods for public comment as we continue through this process. Some of the things that the board suggested were looking at Palmer Lane, which is Ronald Reagan on the north side of 1431, which is also Whitestone when you get into Cedar Park, and 1431 over there. Using Ronald Reagan as a natural, or Palmer, I'm sorry, as a natural boundary for Stiles and Palmer. So what you're seeing now on the screen is a map from scenario B. So what they're asking for, looking forward for scenario A, would be using Palmer. The east side of Palmer would go to Henry Middle School. The west side of Palmer would continue, I'm sorry, I flipped that. The west side of Palmer would go from Stiles to Henry in the Avery Ranch neighborhood, and the east side of Palmer would continue going to Stiles. One of the advantages of that is proximity. Some of those Avery Ranch neighborhoods are very close to Henry and drive past Henry on their way up Palmer and on Ronald Reagan onto Stiles. One of the negatives that this will do would be breaking up Rutledge, which currently goes 100% from Rutledge Elementary to Stiles and then to Avery, then to Vista Ridge High School.
So that begs the question, why not just take that entire neighborhood and rezone them to Henry?
And looking at Avery Ranch as a whole and both sides of Palmer, it's such a large number of students. If you reassigned all of those students from Stiles to Henry, Henry would be over 1,800 students. Our middle schools are typically equipped to handle about, and Henry is one of those, about 1,300, 1,350. And that was a level of crowding. Although we can do a lot for kids in schools, and oftentimes have to deal with schools that are over their original intended capacity through portable buildings, through some structural things with the principals, and through staffing, because it is important to note that we staff based on a per student basis. So a school with more students does have staffing to meet those needs. Getting to an 1,800 number of enrollment is not something that's really palatable for a school that's built for 1,350.
Well, and it really goes back to some of the original issues that the community brought forward, and that was to minimize overcrowding. Some overcrowding is going to happen when you have a fast growth district, but I know from the board conversations that was an important issue for our Board of Trustees to minimize that impact as much as possible. So Palmer being a natural boundary, the east side going up to Stiles and the west side going to Henry in the Avery Ranch area is why the board was considering that. What other changes do you see possibly in C from B that we may be bringing forward to the board at the next meeting?
So a couple of the things that the board had asked us to take a look at, the other big one was an additional, so there's a large neighborhood in the city of Cedar Park called Buttercup Creek, and that Buttercup Creek is such a large neighborhood, it has multiple elementary assignments, and it currently has 2 middle school assignments as students go from, in Buttercup, both to Henry and to Cedar Park. So the board had asked us, in looking at the crowding at Henry, in scenario B, which when you add in some of those Avery Ranch students, maybe to relieve some of that crowding, look at taking some more of those students in the Buttercup neighborhood and assigning them to Cedar Park middle school.
And again, that was for the purposes of trying to even out as much as possible the number of students at every campus. So we're tweaking it constantly. There's a process that we're going through. I know that there are some little neighborhoods that have small numbers of children that we're also looking forward to looking at in terms of, do we keep them where they're at, or do we move them so we have as pure feeder patterns as possible? And again, what we try to do, as you pointed out, 7 of 9 middle schools have pure feeder patterns. Again, as we talked about earlier, that helps in so many areas. But one of the things that really is interesting about that is when you sit down and you look at keeping a community together as much as possible, our board talked about, is it more important to keep elementary to middle school together as much as possible, or middle school to high school? And I overwhelmingly heard that both are important if we can make it happen, but because of UIL activities and because of kids' participation in extracurricular events, that middle school to high school transition is critical.
And I do think it's important just to note that we have amazing coaches, amazing principals, amazing teachers at all of our schools. And they do whatever it takes to make sure kids have the best opportunity possible, whether that means there's a split feeder pattern or a crowded school. They're doing what it takes. We're trying to find that balance, and that's really the charge of the board right now in administration, and trying to set them in a situation where they can make the best decision for the most amount of kids to have the most optimal situation that you can. The challenge is that the challenge in doing that is being able to just weigh the different priorities. You know, you look at proximity for one school and making a decision that impacts and keeps kids as close as possible, and then you create crowding. And then you move kids on the other side to relieve crowding, and then you create crowding at another school. And then maybe you move those kids around, and then, hey, you're moving a neighborhood that's been moved around a bunch of times, or you're splitting a neighborhood in half. Putting boundaries together is a complex narrative with lots of different variables. But I can tell you, and getting to work with the team that actually puts together the maps in Leander ISD, who looks at the data, looks at our demographic report, which is also available online on that webpage. I'm going to plug again, www.leanderisd.org/MSAZ. When they look at all that data, man, they're trying to do what's best for the most amount of kids. We're very blessed in Leander ISD to have staff members who live in our district. We have a great, healthy mix of not only fresh faces of people who are new to the area, but also people who have been in this community for decades. And they're bringing different perspectives and trying to do what's in the best interest of the most kids possible. And that's really what we're trying to do in bringing forth recommendations to the board.
And I think it's also important to note that we do look at right down to the individual student level, because there are some neighborhoods that have very small cohorts, and we're trying to do what's best for those individual students as well. So it's a complex maze, and it's really a complicated system, but I think we're getting close as we move through different scenarios. So let's talk a little bit about scenario C. I know we've had some initial conversations. When do we believe the public is going to have an access to actually viewing scenario C?
So right now, April 4th will be the first public meeting, and it'll be of the Board of Trustees, where we will have scenario C discussed and out there. After that,
so let's talk about that for a moment. How are the community members be able to give feedback on scenario C after it's actually presented at the Board of Trustees meeting?
Absolutely. So our process along the way calls for public forums once we're down to a single scenario from the Board of Trustees. So we believe that will happen at the April 4th meeting. It'll either be that scenario C or scenario C with modifications based on that Board of Trustees meeting. We will immediately begin publishing that scenario that will go to public comment as soon as that meeting is done. That way people have an opportunity to weigh in a formal way. We will have a minimum of 2 public meetings out in community areas, and we're actually going to do one live here streaming on different platforms to have a 3rd public hearing to be able to collect feedback to present to the Board of Trustees at April 18th. So it is a tight turnaround to continue to collect feedback, but we've had a focus on collecting feedback along the way and honoring the community's vision and being able to do, again, what we feel is in the best interest of the most people. It will then go to the Board of Trustees with potential changes based on community feedback one more time for discussion at least, and could be more based on the needs of our Board of Trustees, and then a second time for action. So we're talking about several more opportunities for in-person feedback submission, submission through an online platform, through an online forum similar to what we're doing tonight, and then a minimum of 3 additional public Board of Trustee meetings where we'll be having this. And again, this will be implemented in August of 2020 for that 2020-2021 school year.
And I think it's important for people just to know that we really want to hear from you. We do try to take every single comment into consideration. That's why we like Thought Exchange, because it allows the community to actually rank order those comments and give us some feedback. And there could be little tweaks that sometimes the community recognizes because you live in the communities. You know the roads and the patterns and how kids will walk to school. Even though we're out there and I walk those routes regularly, I know Corey does, the team over in transportation does, our facility people do. But you're living in that, and that feedback is really critical to us.
So the way I like to surmise it is our demographer every year in terms of planning and where we need to put new schools. They use something called catchment zones, and that's how they forecast where we're going to need schools moving out, and allows us to do some long-term master planning. And it's a great document to access on our website. The catchment zones this is how we would do zoning if we only focused on hard numbers and data. This process that we go through in engaging our community, working with our elected Board of Trustees, who are our representatives of the community by an electorate, this allows us to put heart to it. And we're in the business of public education and in serving kids and serving students and serving families. And the heart is probably the most important thing. So that's why we work together to merge the two ideas, the head and the heart, and to come up with the best solution for the most kids possible.
I think that's well said. And we always want to certainly use our heads when we're going through situations and think logically, but we are in a people business and the relationships are critical. So I'm really glad you pointed that out. What else would you like to talk about in terms of rezoning that the public may need to know about at this time?
Well, if we're not getting any questions, and if you see me looking to the left, it's looking at our outstanding crew live here in Portable C of Leander ISD to see if there's any questions from the community. And I'm guessing there's not. So please feel free to submit them after the fact. We will go on and be checking those for comments. You can also access Let's Talk through our www.leanderisd.org/MSAZ to submit questions along the process to see everything that we're talking about. I would say the most important thing an individual needs to know or needs to be aware of in looking through this is their neighborhood code number, and it's NBCD, and links all over that website to access this. I think as parents in this community, and it is very fitting to think, how does this impact me? Right. Neighborhood codes are the numerical assignment of neighborhoods in terms of our master planning document for managing growth. It's assigned by our demographer. And although we try to identify the specific neighborhoods we're talking about when we have these discussions, really what we're utilizing are these neighborhood codes, because that's how we assign and track student enrollments and be able to do that. Especially in some of the complexities of some of our neighborhoods, different neighborhoods are known by different things. I know my neighborhood has 2 different codes. We have a west side of our neighborhood that has one code and an east side of our neighborhood that has another code. So it is really important to know specifically what your code is. And if you can see on the map, it's that number that's assigned to a specific demographic area. So we have a PDF on our website where you can search your neighborhood's name and find your specific code and use that when you see our communication, because oftentimes we're referring to the specific neighborhood codes that are moving. So I think it's really important for people. We do a lot to directly communicate with people impacted by changes, but leading into the discussions, we have to kind of refer to those neighborhood codes as the kind of the main point to really know whether or not you're impacted in this.
And so it's important to look at your code and see how it impacts your particular neighborhood. The other thing I would like for you to talk about is when this process nears its completion, you've talked about the steps we'll go through. Mm-hmm. What's an approximate timeline that people can expect to hear something about this has been finalized and voted on by the board? And I know that's always subject to change. Yeah. But what are we looking at this time?
So we have been operating on a timeline. We started in January in terms of these discussions. We've been operating on a timeline to get done by May, to have board action before we break for summer in order to make sure that our community had proper ability to communicate. We understand that once we hit summer, you hit vacation schedules, students are in school, and we wanted to be able to do this out in front of the public eye as much as we can. So that is our goal right now. Obviously, through our elected representation, what we are mainly charged with doing is providing our Board of Trustees the opportunity to make the best decision possible for the most kids. So if our board asks for more time, we will certainly accommodate that because they are our elected representatives charged with making this tough decision, and we're here to serve them to be able to do what's in the best interest, again, of the most kids.
And we're actually talking about the decision being more than a year out
Yes.
from the school opening. So I want to be clear, none of this rezoning impacts next academic year. Danielson Middle School is not scheduled to open for really right now about a year and a half from now. So we try to do it early on so parents will know. And I used to say I was in many fast growth school districts, both as a teacher and a principal. These decisions sometimes can be heart-wrenching, but we really do need to hear from the community and know that no matter where you're at, we're trying to take into consideration all the variables. It is a complex issue, but it's one that we want to hear from you. So as we wrap this down, I want to thank you for being with us today to explain this very clearly, Corey. You did a great job, and I know you've been intimately involved in it. I want to thank the audience for being a part of this, and I want to wish you all a great rest of the week. Any final comments?
No, just continue to follow the process, and I'm going to plug the webpage again, www.leanderisd.org/MSAZ. I want to thank our staff, thank our facilities team for working along, and thank our Board of Trustees for being charged and volunteering to take this task on. And just want to thank everybody. Again, continue to submit questions, and we will respond and get back to you and make sure everyone's on the same page. Thank you all for tuning in tonight.
Have a wonderful day.